The war had taken everything from Kael Draconis except his sword and his name. He rode at the head of his column through the iron-gray dawn, 500 battle-hardened warriors at his back, their armor dull with the dust of 1,000 miles. The Silvercrest Mountains rose before them like the bones of dead giants, their peaks lost in clouds that hung low and heavy with the promise of snow. Somewhere beyond those peaks lay the citadel of his fathers, the throne that was his by blood, the kingdom he had bled for since he was barely old enough to hold a blade. Kael was 38 years old, though the years had carved themselves into his face like runes etched in stone. A scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, a souvenir from the Battle of Thornwood, where 300 of his men had died holding a bridge against an army twice their number. His hair, once black as a raven's wing, was now shot through with silver at the temples. His eyes, the deep amber of aged whiskey, held the distant look of a man who had seen too much death and remembered every face. 5 years he had spent on the northern borders, fighting the endless war against the Iron Maw clan. 5 years of blood and fire and frozen nights where the screams of dying men echoed across empty battlefields. 5 years since he had seen the towers of Silvercrest, felt the warmth of a proper hearth, slept in a bed that was not the cold ground of some forgotten wilderness. But the war had not called him home, the Moon's Covenant had. General Torvik rode up beside him, his massive warhorse snorting clouds of vapor into the cold air. The old warrior was 55 years old, his beard more white than gray now, but his back was still straight and his sword arm still strong. He had served Kael's father before the fall, had taught a young prince how to hold a blade, how to read a battlefield, how to carry the weight of command. He was the closest thing to a father Kael had left. "The men are tired, my king," Torvik said, his voice rough as gravel. "We could make camp in the valley below, reach the citadel by midday tomorrow." Kael did not take his eyes from the mountains. "No, we ride through the night if we must. I want to see those walls before another sun sets." Torvik studied his king's profile for a long moment. He had watched this boy grow into a man, had seen him forge himself in the fires of war until the soft prince became something harder, something sharper. But he had also watched the light dim in those amber eyes, watched the weight of duty crush the joy from a soul that had once known how to laugh. "The covenant does not begin for another fortnight," Torvik said carefully. "There is no need to drive yourself into the ground." "A decade and a half, old friend." Kael's voice was flat, emotionless. "That is how long my uncle has sat on my father's throne as regent. All those years he has ruled in my name while I bled on the borders. Do not speak to me of what there is no need for." Torvik fell silent. There was nothing he could say to that. The bitterness in Kael's voice was not born of impatience. It was born of a wound that had never healed, a loss that time had not softened. King Darius had been a great man, a just ruler, a warrior who led from the front and never asked his men to face any danger he would not face himself. Kael had worshipped his father with the uncomplicated devotion of a son who had not yet learned that even great men could fall. And then had come the night of the Moon's Covenant, the ancient ritual that bound the power of the throne to the lunar cycles, that strengthened the barriers protecting the kingdom from the darkness beyond. Kael had been 23 when word reached the northern front. His father was dead. The ritual had failed. The official story spoke of a weakness in the king's bond with the moon, a failure of will or spirit that had caused the power to consume him from within. Lord Malachar, the king's own brother, had stepped forward to serve as regent until Kael could return. But Kael had not returned. The war had intensified almost immediately, as if the enemies of the realm could sense the weakness at its heart. The Iron Maw clan had launched assault after assault, driving deeper into Lycan territory than they had in 100 years. Kael had been forced to fight a desperate defensive war, reclaiming lost ground inch by bloody inch, while his uncle ruled in his stead. So many years had passed since then. Years of letters from the citadel, assuring him that the kingdom was in good hands. Years of promises that his presence was needed at the front. Years of wondering why his uncle seemed so reluctant to let him come home. Now the Moon's Covenant approached again, as it did once every 20 years. And this time, Kael would not be denied. This time, he would stand in the ritual circle where his father had fallen. He would bind the power of the throne to himself or die trying. And then, finally, he would take back what was his. The column wound its way down from the mountain pass and into the foothills as the sun began its slow descent toward the western peaks. The land here was gentler, the harsh stone giving way to rolling meadows and scattered copses of ancient oaks. They passed through villages that seemed frozen in time, collections of rough stone houses and thatched roofs that had stood unchanged for centuries. The peasants watched them pass with the wary eyes of people who had learned to fear armed men, though some of the older ones recognized the banner of the Draconis line and dared to raise their hands in greeting. It was in one of these villages, a place so small it had no name, that fate reached out and changed the course of everything. The village healer lived in a cottage at the edge of the settlement, set apart from the others as such places often were. The common folk had always viewed those who could mend broken bodies with a mixture of gratitude and suspicion, as if the power to heal might at any moment become the power to harm. The cottage was small but well kept, its thatched roof recently repaired, its garden carefully tended even in the cold months. Elara had lived here for 3 years now, ever since she had fled the last place that had learned what she truly was. She was 22 years old, though she often felt much older. Her hair was the color of autumn leaves, a deep reddish brown that seemed to catch fire in certain lights. Her eyes were the gray of a winter sky, pale and luminous, framed by lashes so dark they seemed painted on. She was not beautiful in the way of court ladies, all silk and powder and calculated charm. Hers was a wilder beauty, the beauty of a storm gathering on the horizon, of moonlight on dark water. But it was not her appearance that set her apart. It was her gift, or her curse, depending on how you looked at it. Elara was an oracle. When she touched another living being, she saw fragments of memory, shards of thought, echoes of emotion. The visions came unbidden and uncontrolled, flooding her mind with images that did not belong to her. A mother's grief over a lost child, a soldier's terror in the moment before a blade found his heart, a lover's ecstasy, a killer's guilt, a dying man's last desperate prayer. It was why she had become a healer. When she touched the sick and the wounded, she often saw the source of their suffering, could trace the illness or injury to its root, and address what others could only guess at. But it came at a price. Every healing left her drained, her mind awash with memories that were not her own, her dreams haunted by the lives of strangers. And sometimes she saw things that were better left unseen. She was grinding herbs when the sound of hooves reached her ears. Many hooves, moving fast. She set down her pestle and moved to the window, her heart already beginning to race. An army on the road meant trouble. It always meant trouble. Soldiers needed food and shelter and entertainment, and they rarely asked politely. But as she watched the column approach, she saw something that made her pause. The banner at its head was black, emblazoned with a silver crescent moon. The mark of House Draconis, the mark of the High King. The army did not stop in the village. It flowed through like a river of steel and leather, disciplined ranks of warriors who kept their eyes forward and their hands away from their weapons. These were not raiders or marauders. These were professional soldiers, and whatever their mission, it did not include terrorizing peasants. Elara let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Perhaps this time she would be spared. Perhaps this time the great events of the world would pass her by without demanding their toll. And then the screaming began. She was out the door before she had time to think, her healer's instincts overriding her caution. A knot of soldiers had gathered at the edge of the road, their horses stamping nervously. In their midst, a man was writhing on the ground, his body arching in agony, foam flecking his lips. "Stand aside!" Elara pushed through the crowd without hesitation, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to dealing with emergencies. "Let me see him." A hand caught her arm, holding her back. She looked up into the weathered face of a massive warrior, his beard white as snow, his eyes hard as flint. "Who are you?" the old warrior demanded. "I am the village healer. Now let me do my work before this man dies." Something in her voice made him release her. She dropped to her knees beside the fallen soldier, her hands already moving to check his pulse, his breathing, the dilation of his pupils. Seizure. A bad one. His teeth had clamped down on his tongue and blood was flowing freely down his chin. "Hold his head," she commanded no one in particular. "Keep him from biting through his tongue." Hands moved to obey. She tore open the soldier's collar, exposing his chest, searching for any sign of injury or illness that might explain the seizure. Her fingers brushed his bare skin, and the world exploded into fragments of another man's life. She saw a great hall, its walls hung with tapestries depicting ancient battles, a long table laden with food and wine, men in fine clothes raising goblets in toast, and at the head of the table, a king. A man who looked so much like the warrior she had seen at the head of the column that for a moment she thought it was the same person. But no. This man was older, his hair fully gray, his face lined with the cares of rule. The vision shifted. The same hall, now empty save for two figures. The king sat slumped in his chair, his goblet fallen from nerveless fingers, wine spreading across the stone floor like blood. And standing over him, a man with cold eyes and a colder smile, watching as the king's breath rattled and stopped. The scene changed again. A council chamber, the cold-eyed man addressing a gathering of lords, his voice smooth with practiced grief. "The moon's covenant has claimed our beloved king. The ritual demanded more than he could give. His spirit was not strong enough to bear the weight of the moon's power. Lies. All lies." Alara saw the truth in the shattered fragments of memory, saw the vial of poison concealed in the cold-eyed man's sleeve, saw the moment it had been poured into the king's wine. Murder, regicide, treason of the highest order. And then the soldier's seizure ended, his body going limp, and Alara was back in the present, gasping for air as if she had been drowning. "He is stable," she heard herself say, her voice distant and strange in her own ears. "The seizure has passed. He will need rest and observation, but he should recover." "What caused it?" the white-bearded warrior asked. He was kneeling across from her now, his eyes sharp with concern for his man. "I do not know." The lie came automatically. She had become good at lying over the years. Sometimes these things happen without warning. The body rebels against itself for reasons we cannot fathom. But even as she spoke, her mind was racing. What she had seen in the soldier's memories was not his own experience. It was something he had witnessed, or perhaps something he had overheard being discussed, a secret carried in the deep places of his mind, unknown even to himself. The king had been murdered, the ritual had not failed, and the murderer had been ruling the kingdom ever since. She looked up at the column of soldiers, at the black banner with its silver moon, and her stomach turned to ice. Because if the warrior at the head of that column was who she thought he was, then he was riding home to honor the memory of a father who had been betrayed by his own blood. And he had no idea. The decision to speak or stay silent should have been simple. It was not. Alara knelt in the dirt beside the unconscious soldier, her mind reeling with the weight of what she had seen. Tell the truth, and she would reveal herself as an oracle. The gift was rare enough to be legendary, and those who possessed it were regarded with a mixture of awe and fear. Some would see her as a blessing, others would see her as a threat. And the man who had killed the king would certainly see her as something that needed to be eliminated. But to stay silent was to be complicit in murder, to let a killer continue to wear the mask of a grieving brother, to watch the true king walk into a den of vipers without knowing that the greatest viper of all had already struck. "You have done well, healer." The voice came from above her, and Alara looked up to see a figure she had only glimpsed from a distance. Cael Draconis had dismounted, and now stood at the edge of the circle of soldiers, his amber eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Up close, he was even more imposing than he had seemed from afar. Tall and broad-shouldered, his body honed by 2 decades of war, he carried himself with the unconscious authority of a man born to command. But it was his eyes that held her. They were not the eyes of a conqueror or a tyrant. They were the eyes of a man who had lost too much and carried the weight of every loss like stones in his pocket. "Thank you, my lord," she heard herself say. The words felt inadequate, foolish even. She was talking to the High King of the Lycan realms, and she had just seen the truth of his father's death playing out in shattered fragments behind her eyes. "General Torvik tells me you are the village healer." Cael's voice was deep and measured, the voice of a man who weighed every word before speaking it. "What is your name?" "Alara, my lord, just Alara." "Just Alara." A ghost of something that might have been amusement flickered across his stern features. "You have skilled hands, just Alara. My man would likely be dead without your intervention." "Healing is my calling, my lord. I do what I can." Cale studied her for a long moment, and she had the uncomfortable sensation that he was seeing more than she wanted him to see. There was an intelligence in those amber eyes that went beyond the simple cunning of a warrior. This was a man who had survived years of brutal warfare, not just through strength of arms, but through strength of mind. "We ride for Silvercrest," he said at last. "The journey will take another 2 days. I would ask you to accompany us, to tend to this man until we can deliver him to the physicians of the Citadel." It was phrased as a request, but Alara understood the reality. When a king asked, you did not refuse, and in truth, part of her was relieved. The vision had shown her something that could not be ignored. Perhaps this was fate's way of pushing her toward the path she knew she had to take. "Of course, my lord, I will gather my supplies." She returned to her cottage with legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. Her hands shook as she packed her medicines and herbs, her mind turning over the impossible situation she found herself in. How could she tell him? What words could possibly convey what she had seen? And even if she found the words, why would he believe her? She was a nobody, a village healer from a place so insignificant it had no name. He was the High King, returning home to perform a sacred ritual. Why would he listen to her wild tales of murder and conspiracy? But beneath the fear and the doubt, something else was stirring, a strange sense of purpose, of rightness, as if her entire life had been leading to this moment. All the years of running, of hiding her gift, of pretending to be something less than what she was. Perhaps they had all been preparation for this single act of truth. When she emerged from the cottage with her pack slung over her shoulder, a horse was waiting for her. Not a war horse like the soldiers rode, but a sturdy mountain pony with a gentle eye and a steady gait. General Torvik himself held the reins. "Can you ride?" he asked, his gruff voice somehow softer than before. "Well enough, General." He helped her mount, his massive hands surprisingly gentle. "Stay close to the column. We have scouts ranging ahead, but these are dangerous times. The king's enemies would love to catch us in the open." The king's enemies. If only he knew how close those enemies truly were. The column resumed its march, and Alara found herself riding near the center, surrounded by warriors who regarded her with a mixture of curiosity and indifference. The soldier she had saved was loaded onto a wagon, still unconscious but breathing steadily. She checked on him regularly, but her mind was elsewhere. The first night, they made camp in a sheltered valley where a stream provided fresh water and a grove of ancient oaks offered protection from the wind. Alara was given a small tent of her own, a luxury she suspected was not normally extended to camp followers. She sat inside as darkness fell, listening to the sounds of the army settling in for the night, and wondered if she was brave enough to do what needed to be done. She was not brave. She had never been brave. Her entire life had been a series of strategic retreats, of running from danger rather than facing it. When the people of her birth village had begun to whisper about the strange girl who seemed to know things she should not know, she had fled. When her second home had grown suspicious of her uncanny ability to diagnose ailments no one else could identify, she had fled again. Running was what she did. It was what she was good at. But this time there was nowhere to run. The tent flap rustled, and she looked up to see Cale Draconis standing at the entrance. He had removed his armor and wore only a simple tunic and breeches, but he still seemed to fill the small space with his presence. "May I enter?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. He sat across from her, folding his long legs beneath him with a warrior's easy grace. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, filled with the distant sounds of the camp and the soft whisper of the wind in the trees. "You are afraid," Cale said at last. It was not a question. Yes, there was no point in denying it. "Of me?" She considered the question, surprised to find that the answer was not entirely what she had expected. "No, my lord, not of you, of what I must tell you." His amber eyes narrowed slightly. "And what is that?" Here it was, the moment she had been dreading and craving in equal measure. She could still lie, still pretend that she was nothing more than a simple healer, swept up in events beyond her understanding. But looking into those weary, watchful eyes, she knew that she could not. "I am an oracle, my lord." The words came out in a rush, as if she needed to say them before her courage failed. "When I touch someone, I see fragments of their memories, their experiences, their secrets." She watched his face for signs of disbelief or fear, but his expression remained carefully neutral. "Go on." When I touched your soldier, the one who seized, I saw something. Not his own memory, but something he had carried in his mind without knowing it. Perhaps something he overheard or witnessed without understanding. What did you see? I saw your father, my lord. Her voice cracked, and she had to force herself to continue. I saw the night he died. He did not fall to the ritual. He was murdered, poisoned by someone he trusted. The silence that followed her words was absolute. Kael sat perfectly still, his face carved from stone, only his eyes alive with a terrible burning intensity. Who? The single word was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of years of grief and rage. Elara swallowed hard. I could not see his face clearly in the vision, but I saw enough. A man of your father's court. Someone who stood to gain from his death. Someone who spoke the lies about the failed ritual to the gathered lords. Kael's hands had clenched into fists, the knuckles white with tension. When he spoke again, his voice was controlled, but she could hear the fury beneath the surface, held back by sheer force of will. My uncle, you are describing my uncle. I am telling you what I saw, my lord. The interpretation is yours to make. He rose abruptly and began to pace the small confines of the tent, his movements sharp and predatory. Elara watched him in silence, her heart pounding. She had done it. She had spoken the truth, and now she waited to see what would become of her because of it. Why should I believe you? Kael stopped his pacing and turned to face her, his amber eyes boring into hers. You are a stranger, a village healer. You could be a spy sent by my enemies to sow discord. You could be mad. You could be 1,000 things. I could be, Elara agreed. But ask yourself this, my lord. What do I have to gain by lying? If I am a spy, I have just revealed myself to you and placed my life in your hands. If I am mad, surely there are easier delusions than one that will lead me into the heart of a political conspiracy. And if I am telling the truth, then my father was betrayed by his own blood, and the man who killed him has been ruling in my name ever since. The words hung in the air between them, terrible and undeniable. Kael turned away again, but not before Elara saw something break behind his eyes. All those years of believing his father had simply failed, had been too weak to complete the ritual that had been completed by Draconis kings for generations. All those years of carrying that shameful legacy, of wondering if the same weakness lurked within himself. And now the truth. Not weakness, but treachery. Not failure, but murder. General Torvik, Kael said suddenly. He was my father's man before he was mine. He has always harbored doubts about the official account of that night. Then perhaps you should speak with him. Kael looked at her, and something in his expression had changed. The suspicion was still there, but it was tempered now with something else. Consideration. Evaluation. He was weighing her, measuring her worth the way a commander measures a soldier before deciding whether to trust them with a vital mission. You will tell no one else what you have told me, not until I have had time to verify it. Of course, my lord. And you will continue to accompany us to Silvercrest. I may have need of your particular abilities before this is done. She bowed her head in acknowledgement, trying to ignore the cold finger of fear tracing its way down her spine. She had wanted to stay silent, to remain invisible. Instead, she had thrust herself into the center of a storm that might consume them all. Kael paused at the entrance to the tent, his back to her. Elara, if what you have told me is true, then you have done me a service I can never repay. And if it is not— He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Then he was gone, leaving her alone with the darkness and her fears. The rest of the journey passed in a haze of anxiety and anticipation. Elara kept to herself, tending to the recovering soldier and avoiding the curious glances of the warriors around her. Word had spread that the village healer had somehow earned the king's attention, and the men regarded her with a new wariness. She was no longer invisible. She was a piece on the board now, even if no one yet understood what role she was meant to play. She saw Kael only in glimpses. He rode at the head of the column with General Torvik, their heads often bent together in urgent conversation. Whatever they discussed, it was not shared with the rank and file. But Elara noticed the way Torvik's face had grown grimmer since the night she had spoken her truth. She noticed the way the old general's hand sometimes drifted to the hilt of his sword, as if he were imagining driving it into someone's heart. On the morning of the third day, they crested a final ridge and Silvercrest lay before them. The citadel was like nothing Elara had ever seen. It had been carved from the living rock of the mountainside, its towers and walls flowing seamlessly from the stone as if they had grown there rather than been built. The highest tower rose like a spear against the sky, its peak lost in the clouds that perpetually shrouded the summit. Banners bearing the silver moon of House Draconis flew from every battlement, and the road leading to the great gates was lined with statues of kings long dead, their stone faces worn smooth by centuries of wind and weather. It was beautiful. It was terrible. It was a monument to power that had endured for 1,000 years, and somewhere within those walls, a murderer sat on the throne. The gates opened at their approach, and they rode into a courtyard filled with servants and soldiers and nobles who had come to welcome their king home. Alara hung back, trying to make herself small, but there was no hiding in a place like this. Eyes tracked her from every direction, calculating, assessing, wondering what a common healer was doing in the company of the High King. A man descended the steps of the great hall, his arms spread wide in welcome. He was perhaps 50 years old, though he carried his years well. His hair was iron gray, swept back from a high forehead, and his face was handsome in a severe, aristocratic way. He was dressed in rich robes of black and silver, and a chain of office hung around his neck. Lord Malachar, regent of the realm, brother to the murdered king. "Nephew!" His voice boomed across the courtyard, warm with apparent joy. "At last! We had begun to fear you would never return to us." Kael dismounted and allowed his uncle to embrace him, but Alara, watching from a distance, saw the tension in his shoulders, the careful way he controlled his expression. He knew. He believed her, and now he was face to face with the man who had killed his father, and he had to smile and pretend he suspected nothing. "Uncle?" Kael's voice was even, betraying nothing. "The war kept me longer than I wished, but I am here now." "And just in time for the covenant!" Malachar stepped back, his hands still gripping Kael's shoulders, his eyes moving over his nephew's face with an intensity that made Alara's skin crawl. "You look well. The years of battle have made you strong. Your father would be proud." The hypocrisy of those words seemed to hang in the air like poison. Your father would be proud, spoken by the man who had poured poison into that father's wine. "I hope to honor his memory," Kael said, and only someone watching very closely would have caught the edge beneath his words. The welcoming ceremonies continued, a blur of introductions and formalities that Alara observed from the margins. She was eventually handed off to a stern-faced servant woman who showed her to a small chamber in a distant wing of the citadel. It was clear from the location that she was considered someone of little importance, housed far from the centers of power. That suited her perfectly. She spent the rest of the day in her room, trying to calm her racing thoughts. The walls of the citadel pressed in around her, thick with secrets and old blood. She could feel the weight of history here, the accumulated presence of all the kings and queens and courtiers who had lived and loved and schemed and died within these stone halls. Night had fallen when the knock came at her door. She opened it to find a hooded figure standing in the corridor. For one terrifying moment, she thought Malachar had discovered her secret and sent an assassin. Then the figure pushed back his hood, and she found herself looking into the amber eyes of the king. "You should not be here," she whispered. "If anyone sees you." "No one saw me." Kael slipped past her into the room, closing the door behind him. "I have spent many years learning to move unseen through hostile territory. The corridors of my own citadel present little challenge." He looked different here, in the intimate confines of her small chamber. Less the distant king, and more simply a man carrying a burden that threatened to crush him. "I spoke with Torvik," he said. "He has always believed there was something wrong about my father's death. The timing, the manner, the way Malachar was so perfectly positioned to step into the void. But he had no proof, no witness, nothing but suspicion. And now? Now he has your testimony. He believes you." Alara felt something loosen in her chest. "And you? Do you believe me?" Kael was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion he was struggling to contain. "My father was the strongest man I ever knew. He had completed 3 moons covenants before that night. The ritual was second nature to him. I never believed he simply failed. I never could. But I had nothing to put in place of the official story. No alternative explanation. So I buried my doubts and told myself I was being foolish. That grief was making me see conspiracies where none existed." He looked at her, and his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You have given me the truth. Or at least, a truth that makes more sense than the lie I have been living with since his death, and for that I owe you more than I can say." Alara reached out without thinking and took his hand. The moment her skin touched his, the visions came. She saw a boy of 10, laughing as his father taught him to swing a wooden sword. She saw a young man of 18, standing at his father's side as they reviewed the troops before battle. She saw a warrior of 23, his face twisted with grief, receiving the news that his world had ended. She saw years of war compressed into fragments of memory, blood and death and the slow hardening of a soul that had once known how to love. And she saw something else, something bright and fierce buried beneath all the pain. Hope, a desperate, stubborn hope that refused to die no matter how much darkness tried to smother it. She gasped and released his hand, the visions fading like smoke in the wind. "What did you see?" Kale's voice was curious, not demanding. "You," she said simply. "I saw you." He nodded slowly, as if this answer satisfied him. "Then you know what I am. A man who has given everything to a kingdom that may have been stolen from him by blood treachery. A man who wants nothing more than justice, but fears that justice may tear the realm apart. What will you do?" "I do not know yet. If I move against Malachar openly, I will need proof that the lords of the realm will accept. Your testimony alone may not be enough. An oracle's visions can be questioned, dismissed as fantasy or fabrication. Then we need to find more evidence." "We?" She met his gaze steadily. "I did not come this far to walk away now, my lord. I have seen the truth. I cannot unknow it, and I cannot stand by while a murderer continues to wear the mask of a loyal servant." Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or respect. He had clearly not expected this common healer to volunteer herself for what could easily become a deadly game. "You understand the risk," he said. "If Malachar learns what you are, what you can do, he will have you killed. Quietly, efficiently, without leaving any trace." "I have been running from risks my entire life, my lord. Perhaps it is time I stopped running." A ghost of a smile touched Kael's lips. It transformed his face, softening the harsh lines of war and care, giving her a glimpse of the man he might have been in a kinder world. "Very well, Just Alara, we shall face this danger together." He left her then, slipping back into the darkened corridors as silently as he had come. Alara stood alone in her small chamber, her heart pounding, her mind racing with the implications of what she had committed herself to. She had come to Silvercrest as a healer, tending to a sick soldier. Now she was a conspirator in a plot against the most powerful man in the kingdom, second only to the king himself. She was involved in something far larger than herself, caught up in the currents of history that would sweep her along whether she willed it or not. And somewhere in the depths of the citadel, a murderer was making his own plans. Lord Malachar had waited many long years for this moment, years of patient manipulation, of careful positioning, of slowly tightening his grip on the levers of power. He had expected Kael to remain on the northern front indefinitely, bleeding out his strength against the endless assaults of the Iron Maw clan. He had not expected his nephew to return for the Covenant. But Malachar was nothing if not adaptable. He had contingencies. He had allies. He had a daughter who had been groomed since birth to take her place beside whoever sat on the throne. The game was not over. It was only entering its final, most dangerous phase. And Alara, the oracle who had stumbled into the midst of it all, would soon learn that the shadows of the crown concealed horrors far darker than murder. And the citadel of Silvercrest slept, but its secrets were wide awake. They whispered in the stones and echoed in the empty halls. They waited in the darkness for someone brave enough or foolish enough to drag them into the light. That someone had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same again. The days that followed Alara's arrival at Silvercrest were a masterclass in the art of deception. On the surface, life in the citadel proceeded with the stately rhythm of an ancient court preparing for a sacred ritual. Servants polished silver and laid out fine linens. Cooks prepared elaborate feasts. Tailors worked through the nights stitching ceremonial robes. The Moon's Covenant was the most important event in a generation, and every detail had to be perfect. Beneath that polished surface, a different game was being played. Alara learned quickly that the citadel was a maze of whispered conversations and watchful eyes. Nothing happened within these walls that someone did not observe, record, and report. The servants gossiped among themselves in the kitchens and laundries. The guards noted who came and went through every door. And everywhere, always, there were the spies. She spotted them within her first week, a young maid who lingered too long outside her door, a gardener whose eyes followed her with too much interest as she walked the grounds, a scholar in the library who always seemed to be studying the same dusty tome whenever she entered. They were Malakar's creatures, she was certain. The regent had built a web of informants that stretched into every corner of the citadel, and she had walked directly into its center. General Torvik became her unlikely ally in navigating this treacherous landscape. The old warrior had spent decades learning the hidden passages and forgotten corners of Silvercrest, and he shared that knowledge freely. He showed her the servants' stairs that allowed movement between floors without passing through the main corridors. He pointed out the alcoves where one could stand unseen while conversations passed by. He taught her which guards could be trusted and which were bought men whose loyalty lay with gold rather than honor. "Malakar has been building his power base since the old king's death," Torvik told her one evening as they walked the battlements, their words lost in the wind that whipped around the towers. "He has placed his people in every position of importance. The captain of the household guard is his cousin. The master of coin is his former squire. Even the head cook is a woman whose family owes him debts they can never repay." "How has the king allowed this to happen?" Torvik's laugh was bitter. "The king has been fighting a war on the other side of the kingdom. He trusted his uncle to manage affairs at home. That trust was misplaced. Can we expose him? Bring his conspiracy into the light? Not without proof that will convince the lords of the realm. Malakar is clever. He has kept his hands clean, worked through intermediaries, left no evidence that leads directly back to him. Your vision of the king's murder is damning, but visions can be dismissed as fantasy or fabrication. We need something more, something tangible." Finding that something became Alara's obsession, she began her investigation carefully, using her position as a healer to move through the citadel without arousing suspicion. She offered her services to the servants' quarters, treating minor ailments and injuries that the court physicians considered beneath their notice. The common folk were grateful for her attention, and grateful people talked. She learned that Malakar had been making frequent trips to the eastern wing of the citadel, a section that had been closed off for years due to supposed structural damage. She learned that strange visitors sometimes arrived at the citadel in the dead of night, entering through a postern gate that was supposed to be sealed. She learned that the regent's personal guard had been expanded threefold in recent months, drawing soldiers from the border garrisons with promises of better pay and easier duty. But her most valuable discovery came from the most unexpected source. She was walking in the gardens one afternoon, enjoying a rare moment of solitude, when she became aware that she was being followed. The pursuer made no attempt at concealment. He walked openly along the gravel path behind her, his footsteps crunching with deliberate loudness. Alara turned to face him. He was young, perhaps 25, with the lean build of a swordsman and the sharp features of aristocratic breeding. His hair was the color of burnished copper, and his eyes were a pale, unsettling blue that seemed to see through everything they looked upon. He was handsome in a cold, calculating way, like a beautifully crafted blade. "You are the healer," he said. It was not a question. "The one who arrived with the king." "I am Alara, and you are?" "Cassian." He offered the name without elaboration, as if it should mean something to her. It did. Cassian was Malakar's son. The younger child, overshadowed by his sister Veloria, rarely mentioned in the gossip that circulated through the servants' quarters. He was said to be quiet, bookish, more interested in ancient texts than in the intrigues of the court. Looking at him now, Alara suspected that reputation was a carefully cultivated mask. "Lord Cassian," she corrected herself, inclining her head in a gesture of respect she did not feel. "I am honored to meet you." "Are you?" His smile was thin, knowing. "I wonder. You have been asking questions, healer, listening at doors, noting who comes and goes through the eastern wing. Did you think no one would notice?" Alara's blood ran cold. She had been careful, or so she had thought, but clearly not careful enough. If Cassian had observed her activities, then others might have as well, others who would report directly to his father. "I am a healer," she said, keeping her voice steady. "I observe. It is part of my craft." "You are more than a healer. You are an oracle." He said the word without emphasis, as if commenting on the weather. "I saw what you did with the soldier who seized, the way you touched him and then spoke of things you could not possibly have known. The gift is rare, but not unknown. My father's library contains several accounts of those who possessed it. If you know what I am, Then you know I am dangerous." Alara met his pale eyes without flinching. "You know that one touch could lay bare every secret you carry." "Yes." Cassian took a step closer, and she saw something flicker behind those cold eyes, something that might have been desperation. "That is precisely why I sought you out." The words hung between them, laden with implications she could not quite grasp. "Explain yourself." Cassian glanced around the garden, confirming they were alone. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "My father is a monster. He murdered the king. He has been bleeding this kingdom dry since that night, enriching himself and his allies while the common folk starve and the borders crumble. And now he is planning something worse, something that will tear the realm apart." Alara stared at him, trying to process this sudden reversal. "You expect me to believe that you would betray your own father? I expect you to touch me and see the truth for yourself." He extended his hand, palm up, an offering and a challenge in one gesture. Alara hesitated. This could be a trap. Cassian could be acting on his father's orders, trying to discover what she knew by feeding her false information. Or he could be genuine, a young man sick of his family's crimes and desperate for redemption. There was only one way to know for certain. She reached out and took his hand. The visions came in a torrent, faster and more intense than anything she had experienced before. She saw Cassian as a child, hiding in a closet while his father raged at servants who had displeased him. She saw him as a young man, discovering the truth about his grandfather's death in a forbidden journal hidden in the library's deepest stacks. She saw him standing in shadows, listening as his father outlined plans that made his blood run cold. And she saw what he had learned. The full scope of Malakar's treachery laid bare in fragments of overheard conversations and stolen documents. Malakar was not merely content to rule as regent. He intended to claim the throne for himself. The Moon's Covenant was the key. If Kael failed the ritual, as his father had supposedly failed, the laws of succession would be thrown into chaos. The lords would need a strong hand to guide them through the crisis. Malakar would present himself as that hand, and by the time anyone realized what had happened, he would be too firmly entrenched to remove. But that was not the worst of it. Malakar had been negotiating in secret with warlord Ravuk of the Ironmaw clan, the same enemies that Kael had been fighting for so many years. The regent had promised them the southern plains, the richest farmland in the kingdom, in exchange for their support. When Kael fell, the Ironmaw would pour through the suddenly undefended borders, and Malakar would welcome them as allies rather than invaders. The kingdom would survive, but it would be a puppet state, ruled by a traitor in service to foreign conquerors. Alara released Cassian's hand, gasping for breath. The young lord was pale, shaken by the intimacy of having his memories laid bare to another. "Now you know," he said. "Now you understand why I cannot stand by and watch." "Why come to me? Why not go to the king directly?" "Because the king does not know me. He has no reason to trust the son of his enemy, but you have his ear. You can make him listen." "And what do you want in return for this information?" Cassian's jaw tightened. "My sister, Valoria. She is not part of my father's schemes. She has been used, manipulated, groomed since birth to be a pawn in his game. When this is over, when my father falls, I want your word that she will be spared." Alara studied him for a long moment. The request was reasonable, even noble. A brother trying to protect a sister from the consequences of their father's crimes. "I cannot promise anything on the king's behalf, but I will tell him what you have told me, and I will speak for your sister's innocence." "That is all I ask." They parted then, each going their separate way through the garden paths. Alara's mind was racing, trying to process everything she had learned. Malakar's conspiracy was even more vast than she had feared. It reached beyond the borders of the kingdom, encompassing enemies who should have been implacable foes. The regent was willing to sell his own people to foreign conquerors for the chance to wear a crown. She had to tell Kael tonight, but she never got the chance. The knock came at her door just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. She opened it expecting to find a servant with her evening meal. Instead, she found 4 armed guards in the livery of the regent's household. "Alara the healer," the captain announced, his voice flat and official. "You are to come with us by order of Lord Malakar, regent of the realm." Her heart stopped. Somehow, despite all her caution, she had been discovered. Cassian had betrayed her, or someone had observed their conversation in the garden, or one of the many spies had finally pieced together enough of her activities to realize the threat she posed. On what charge? Witchcraft. The captain's eyes were cold, pitiless. The practice of dark arts within the citadel walls. The penalty, as I'm sure you know, is death. They gave her no chance to resist or flee. Strong hands seized her arms, and she was marched through the corridors of Silvercrest like a common criminal. Servants stopped and stared as she passed. Nobles whispered behind their hands. Word would spread through the citadel like wildfire. By morning, everyone would know that the strange healer who had arrived with the king was a witch marked for execution. She was taken to the great hall, where a tribunal had already assembled. Malachar sat in the regent's chair, his expression grave with false solemnity. Around him were gathered the lords of the council, men who owed their positions and their fortunes to his patronage. At the edge of the room, Elara spotted Kael, his face a mask of controlled fury. General Torvik stood beside him, one hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "Elara of no house and no name," Malachar intoned, his voice carrying through the silent hall. "You stand accused of practicing the forbidden arts of witchcraft and dark sorcery within the sacred walls of Silvercrest. How do you plead?" "I am no witch." Elara's voice was steady, though her heart was pounding. "I am a healer, nothing more." "A healer?" Malachar's smile was thin, predatory. "Then how do you explain your unnatural ability to divine the ailments of the sick? Your knowledge of things no common healer could possibly know? Your whispered conversations with the king, filling his ears with poison against his own family? He knew everything. Or at least he knew enough to destroy her. "I have done nothing wrong. I have committed no crime." "The practice of the oracle's sight is a crime under the ancient laws." Malachar's voice was smooth, reasonable, the voice of a man delivering justice rather than persecution. The ability to read minds, to steal secrets from the souls of the innocent, is a form of violation that our ancestors wisely chose to outlaw. You have confessed to possessing this ability. The penalty is clear. "I have confessed nothing." "Then you deny being an oracle?" The trap was elegant in its simplicity. If she denied the accusation, Malachar would produce witnesses who had seen her use her gift. The soldiers she had healed on the road, the servants she had touched while treating their injuries, perhaps even Cassian, dragged forward to testify against the woman he had tried to help. But if she admitted the truth, she condemned herself by her own words. "I am an oracle." She spoke the words clearly, refusing to cower or cringe. "But I have used my gift only to heal, never to harm. And if possessing this gift is a crime, then I call upon the king's justice to hear my case." Malachar's eyes narrowed. He had expected her to deny, to lie, to give him ammunition for a lengthy trial that would drag her name through the mud. Her open admission had thrown him off balance. "The king has no standing in this matter. As regent, I speak with the king's authority in all domestic affairs. The moon's covenant has not yet been completed. Until it is, the throne remains in my stewardship." "That is a lie, and you know it." The voice came from across the hall, cutting through the murmured conversations like a blade. Kael stepped forward, his amber eyes blazing with cold fire. "I am Kael Draconis, son of Darius, rightful king of the Lycan realms. I have returned to claim my throne and complete the covenant that my father began. Your regency ends the moment I declare it ended, and I declare it now." The hall erupted into chaos. Lords shouted at each other, some supporting the king, others loyal to Malachar. Guards reached for their weapons, uncertain who they should be protecting. Through it all, Malachar sat unmoved, a slight smile playing at the corners of his lips. "My dear nephew," he said, his voice cutting through the noise with practiced authority, "your passion does you credit, but the law is clear. A king must complete the moon's covenant before he can claim full authority over the realm. Until that ritual is performed, the regent retains power. It has been this way for 1,000 years. Then we will perform the ritual tonight." Impossible. The covenant requires preparation, purification, the alignment of celestial bodies. It can only be performed on the night of the full moon, which is still 10 days hence. Until then, I remain regent. And as regent, I will not allow a confessed witch to whisper her poison into the king's ear. Kael took another step forward, and for a moment, Elara thought he might draw his sword and cut Malachar down where he sat. The tension in the hall was electric, a storm waiting to break. One wrong word, one sudden movement, and blood would flow. But Kael was a warrior who had survived many years of brutal warfare. He knew when to attack and when to wait. "Very well, uncle," You hide behind the letter of the law, then let us use the law against you." His voice was calm now, controlled, all the more dangerous for its quietness. "I invoke the right of trial by testimony. Let this oracle demonstrate her gift before the assembled lords. Let her touch witnesses of your choosing and speak what she sees. If she is false, her deception will be revealed. If she speaks true, then her gift is proven to be a force for good rather than evil." Malakar's smile flickered. He had not expected this. Trial by testimony was an ancient tradition, rarely invoked, but still enshrined in the laws of the realm. It allowed an accused to prove their innocence through demonstration rather than mere words. And who would you have her touch? Whose secrets would you have her expose? Yours. The word fell into a silence so complete that Alara could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. "You accuse me of something?" Malakar's voice was ice. "I accuse you of nothing. I simply offer you the chance to prove your innocence, as you would have her prove hers. If you have nothing to hide, uncle, then you have nothing to fear from her touch." The lords of the council exchanged uneasy glances. Several of them, Alara noticed, had gone very pale. They knew, perhaps not everything, but enough to fear what an oracle might reveal. Malakar rose from his chair, his movements slow and deliberate. "You would have me submit to violation by a witch? You would have the regent of the realm exposed to such indignity?" "I would have the truth. Is that not what justice demands?" "Justice!" Malakar spat the word. "You speak of justice while defending a woman who has clearly enchanted you with her dark arts. Look at yourself, nephew. You have known this healer for mere days, yet you stand here defying your own family for her sake. What hold does she have over you that could explain such madness?" "She has no hold over me. She has only shown me the truth." "What truth?" Kael's eyes burned. "The truth about my father's death." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the whispered conversation ceased. Every eye in the hall was fixed on the confrontation between king and regent, the two most powerful men in the realm standing face to face across a gulf of accusation and denial. Malakar recovered first. His expression shifted from shock to sorrowful understanding, the mask of a concerned uncle facing a nephew driven mad by grief. "Ah, I see now. This witch has been feeding you fantasies about your father's death. She has taken advantage of your pain, your loss, to twist your mind against those who love you. This is worse than I feared. She has shown me what she saw in the memories of others. A king murdered by poison on the night of the covenant. A regent who stepped forward to fill the void he himself had created. Lies, fabrications, the ravings of a deranged mind. Then prove it." Kael's voice was relentless. "Accept the trial by testimony. Let her touch you and speak what she sees. If you are innocent, you have nothing to fear." "I will not submit to such degradation. Then I invoke an older law, trial by combat." Kael drew his sword, the blade singing as it cleared the scabbard. "I challenge you, Malakar, for the throne of our fathers. If I am wrong, if you are innocent, then let the gods judge between us. Let the stronger arm decide the truth." For a long moment, Malakar simply stared at his nephew. Then he began to laugh. It was a cold sound, utterly without humor. "You would fight me? An old man who has not lifted a sword in battle for 20 years? Where is the honor in that?" "There is no honor in any of this. There is only justice." "Very well." Malakar's smile was a blade. "I accept your challenge. But as the challenged party, I claim the right to name a champion to fight in my stead. This is permitted under the laws you so love to invoke." "Name your champion." "I name Ravok, warlord of the Ironmaw clan." The gasps that echoed through the hall were like a physical blow. Ravok, the most feared warrior in the northern territories, the man who had killed more Lycan soldiers than any enemy in living memory, the beast who had nearly broken their kingdom during years of relentless warfare. "You would invite our enemy into our sacred halls?" Kael's voice was tight with disbelief. "You would let a foreign butcher decide the fate of our throne?" "Ravok is no longer our enemy. He has accepted my offer of alliance. The war is over, nephew. The southern plains will be ceded to his people in exchange for peace. It is done." "It is treason. It is politics, something you never learned while you were playing soldier on the borders." Malakar's mask had finally slipped, revealing the cold calculation beneath. "You think you can simply ride in here and take back what is yours? You think years of careful planning can be undone by a scarred warrior and his witch? The world does not work that way." "Perhaps not, but I will fight your champion nonetheless. I will fight him, and I will win. And then I will put your head on a spike above the gates of this citadel." Bold words. We shall see if your sword is as sharp as your tongue. The trial was set for 3 days hence. 3 days for Ravok to arrive from his camp at the border. 3 days for Chaol to prepare for a battle that might be his last. 3 days for Alara to remain imprisoned, waiting to learn if she would live or die. They took her to a cell in the eastern tower, a small stone room with a narrow window that looked out over the mountains. It was comfortable enough, with a bed and a chair and a fireplace to ward off the cold. But the door was locked, and guards stood watch at all hours. She was a prisoner, regardless of the furnishings. Chaol came to her on the first night. He moved through the citadel like a ghost, avoiding Malakar's spies, using the hidden passages Torvik had mapped over decades of service. When he appeared at her door, dismissing the guards with a word, she felt something inside her unclench. She had been afraid she would never see him again. "You should not be here," she said as he entered the cell. "If Malakar learns you have been visiting me, he will use it against you." "Let him." Chaol's voice was weary but determined. "I am done playing his games. In 2 days I will face Ravok in the arena. If I win, I will be king in truth as well as name. If I lose, you will not lose." He looked at her, and she saw the doubt in his amber eyes, the fear he would never admit to anyone else. "Ravok is a legend. He has killed more men in single combat than I can count. He is stronger than me, faster than me, more experienced than me. The odds are not in my favor." "The odds do not know you as I do." Alara reached out and took his hand, deliberately this time, opening herself to the flood of his memories. She let him feel what she felt, see what she saw, his strength, his courage, his unshakable commitment to justice. "You are more than statistics and probabilities. You are a king." He squeezed her hand, holding on as if she were the only solid thing in a world that had turned to quicksand. "There is something I must show you," she said. "Something I saw when I first touched you, in the tent on the road to Silvercrest. I did not tell you then because I was afraid, but you deserve to know now, before you face Ravok." "What is it?" "Your father's last moments. I saw them in the fragments of memory I pulled from the soldier. Not just the murder, but what came before, his final thoughts as the poison took hold." Chaol went very still. "Tell me." "He thought of you, of the boy you had been, and the man you were becoming. He saw you standing before this very throne, a crown on your brow, a kingdom at peace under your rule. His last thought, as his heart stopped, was that you would be a good king, a just king. He died believing in you, Chaol. That was the truth his murderer tried to bury. That is the legacy Malakar has been trying to steal." Tears were streaming down Chaol's face, though he made no sound. Years of grief, years of doubt and self-recrimination, finally finding release. "I have carried such shame," he whispered, "believing my father failed, believing the weakness was in our blood, wondering if I would fail too when my time came." "There was no weakness. There was only treachery, and treachery can be defeated." He raised his head, and she saw something new in his eyes, not just determination, but peace, the peace of a man who had finally made peace with his past. "Thank you, Alara. You have given me a gift I can never repay. Win the trial, take back your throne. That will be payment enough." He smiled then, and for a moment he looked almost young, almost happy. "And if I win? What then? What becomes of the oracle who saved a king?" "I suppose that depends on the king. I would have you stay, here, in Silvercrest, not as a prisoner or a servant, but as an advisor, a partner, someone who can see the truth when others would hide it." "Is that all you would have me be, an advisor?" The question hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Chaol reached up and brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle, almost reverent. "No," he admitted. "That is not all, but I will ask nothing of you that you are not willing to give. Whatever happens, whatever you choose, I will respect your decision." "Then let me make a decision now." Alara rose up on her toes and kissed him. It was a soft kiss, tentative, a question rather than a statement. He answered it with his arms around her, pulling her close, the warmth of his body driving away the cold of the stone cell. In that moment, there was no trial, no throne, no looming battle. There was only the two of them, finding comfort in each other's presence. When they finally parted, both were breathing hard. "I should go," Chaol said reluctantly. "The guards will return soon, and I cannot be found here." "I know. Alara." He paused at the door, looking back at her with eyes that held promises and fears in equal measure. "When this is over, when I am king, there will be choices to make. Difficult choices. I would face them with you beside me, if you are willing." "I am willing." He smiled one last time, and then he was gone, slipping back into the darkness of the citadel. Elara stood alone in her cell, her lips still tingling from his kiss, her heart full of something that felt dangerously like hope. But hope was a fragile thing, and there were those who would crush it without hesitation. The knock came an hour before dawn on the third day. Elara opened the door expecting guards, or perhaps another secret visit from Kael. Instead, she found herself facing a young woman with hair the color of moonlight and eyes of pale, haunting blue. Vialoria, Malakar's daughter, Cassian's sister. "May I enter?" The woman's voice was soft, cultured, giving nothing away. Elara stepped aside, too curious to refuse. Vialoria moved into the cell with the grace of someone trained from birth to command attention. She was beautiful in a cold, perfect way, like a statue carved from ice. But up close, Elara could see the cracks in that perfection, the dark circles under her eyes, the tension in her shoulders, the slight tremor in her hands. "You are wondering why I have come?" The thought had crossed my mind. "My brother Cassian told me about your conversation in the garden. He believes you can be trusted. I am not so certain, but I have run out of options, and desperate times call for desperate measures." "What do you want?" Vialoria turned to face her, and Elara saw something she had not expected in those ice-blue eyes. Terror. "My father is going to destroy everything. Not just the king, not just you. Everything. The alliance with Ravok is only the beginning. Once Kael is dead and my father controls the throne, the Iron Maw will pour across the border. They will take the southern plains, yes, but they will not stop there. They will take everything. My father thinks he can control them, use them as tools for his ambition. He is wrong. Ravok is no man's tool. He will play along until my father is no longer useful, and then he will sweep us all away." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because someone has to stop it, and I cannot. I am watched constantly, controlled, manipulated. Every move I make is reported to my father. But you are already condemned. You have nothing left to lose, and you have the ear of the only man who can defeat my father. Kael is facing Ravok in single combat today. If he loses, nothing else will matter." "He will not lose." Valoria's voice was suddenly fierce. "Not if he knows what I know. Ravok has a weakness, an old wound from a battle years ago. His left knee was shattered by a warhammer. The healer saved the leg, but it never fully recovered. In prolonged combat, it begins to fail. If Kael can extend the fight, wear him down, target that weakness, he can win. Why would you betray your father's champion?" "Because I am tired of being a pawn." Valoria's mask finally cracked, and Elara saw the young woman beneath, frightened, desperate, reaching for any chance at redemption. "I have spent my entire life being molded into my father's tool, trained to seduce the king, to manipulate him, to bear his children and whisper my father's words into his ear. I never wanted any of it. I only wanted to be free." "And if I tell Kael what you have told me, what happens to you?" "I do not know. Perhaps he will spare me. Perhaps he will see me as another of my father's accomplices and have me executed alongside him. It does not matter. Whatever happens to me, at least I will have done one thing in my life that was truly my own choice." She turned to leave but paused at the door. "Tell Kael one more thing. When he faces my father after the trial, he should search the eastern tower. The third floor, behind the tapestry of the moon goddess. That is where my father keeps his most secret documents. The proof of everything. The letters to Ravok, the records of payments to assassins, the truth about King Darius." Then she was gone, leaving Elara alone with revelations that could change everything. Within the hour, a guard she recognized as one of Torvik's trusted men came to escort her to the arena. On the way, she pressed a folded note into his hand with urgent whispered instructions. The message would reach Kael before the combat began. She had to believe that. The sun rose on the day of the trial, and Silvercrest held its breath. Elara was brought to the great arena, a vast circular space open to the sky where disputes had been settled by combat since the citadel was built. Thousands had gathered to watch, lords and ladies in their finest clothes, common folk who had climbed to the upper galleries for a glimpse of history, soldiers standing at attention, their loyalties uncertain, waiting to see which way the wind would blow. At one end of the arena, Kael stood alone. He wore simple armor, the same battered steel he had worn through years of war. His sword hung at his hip, and his shield bore the silver moon of House Draconis. He looked calm, focused, the consummate warrior preparing for battle. At the other end stood Ravok. The warlord of the Iron Maw was a mountain of muscle and scar tissue. He stood nearly 7 feet tall, his body thick with the kind of strength that could crush bones with bare hands. His face was a ruin of old wounds, one eye covered by a leather patch, his jaw twisted where it had been broken and badly set. He carried an enormous war axe that most men could not have lifted, let alone wielded. He looked like death-given form. Malachar sat in the regent's box, his daughter beside him, his expression one of serene confidence. He had already won, or so he believed. Ravok was undefeated in single combat. The king's champion would fall, and with him, the last obstacle to total power. But as the drums began to beat and the crowd fell silent, Alara noticed something. Ravok's left leg, the way he shifted his weight slightly to favor the right, the almost imperceptible stiffness in his knee. Valoria had told the truth, and in Kael's eyes, as he raised his sword in salute, Alara saw that he knew. The message had reached him. The trial by combat had begun, and everything hung in the balance. The first clash of weapons sent echoes rolling across the arena like thunder. Ravok moved with surprising speed for a man of his size, his war axe sweeping through the air in a devastating arc. Kael ducked beneath the blow, feeling the wind of its passage ruffle his hair, and countered with a thrust toward the warlord's midsection. Ravok twisted aside, the blade scoring a thin line across his leather armor, but drawing no blood. They separated, circling each other like wolves, each taking the measure of the other. The crowd was utterly silent, holding their collective breath as the two warriors danced their deadly dance. Alara watched from where she stood under guard, her hands clasped so tightly her nails bit into her palms. She had told Kael everything she knew through that hastily written note. Valoria's revelation about the weak knee, Cassian's intelligence about his father's plans, the location of the hidden documents, all of it committed to paper in the desperate hour before dawn. Ravok attacked again, a brutal combination of strikes that drove Kael backward across the sand. The warlord was testing him, probing his defenses, looking for weaknesses to exploit. His style was all overwhelming force, using his size and strength to batter opponents into submission. Most men would have crumbled under that assault. Kael was not most men. He parried and dodged, giving ground when necessary, conserving his energy, while Ravok expended his in furious attacks. Years of war had taught him patience. He had faced enemies who outmatched him in strength or speed or numbers. He had learned that victory did not always go to the strongest or the fastest. Sometimes it went to the one who could endure. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Blow after blow, parry after parry, the two warriors locked in a contest that seemed to have no end. The sun climbed higher, beating down on the arena, and sweat began to stream down both fighters' faces. And then Alara saw it. Ravok's left leg, the one Valoria had warned about. It was beginning to stiffen, to slow. The warlord was shifting more and more weight to his right side, compensating for the weakness that years of combat had failed to fully heal. Kael saw it too. She could tell by the subtle change in his movements, the way he began to angle his attacks toward the warlord's left flank. He was not trying to land a killing blow. He was trying to force Ravok to pivot, to put pressure on that damaged knee. Ravok realized what was happening a moment too late. He tried to adjust, to protect his weakness, but Kael was already moving. A feint to the right, then a devastating slash to the left. Ravok twisted to block, his left leg buckling slightly under the sudden shift of weight. It was all the opening Kael needed. He pressed the attack with everything he had, driving Ravok backward, forcing him to defend on his weak side. The warlord's movements grew more desperate, more ragged. The inexorable tide had turned. The crowd began to stir, sensing the shift in momentum. Whispers became murmurs, murmurs became shouts. The king was winning. The impossible was happening before their very eyes. And in the regent's box, Malachar's face had gone the color of old ash. Alara allowed herself a single moment of hope. It burned in her chest like a flame, warming her against the cold fear that had gripped her since this nightmare began. The end was coming. She could feel it. One way or another, the game of crowns was about to reach its final move. The arena had become a crucible. Kael pressed his advantage with the relentless precision of a man who had spent years learning that hesitation was death. Each strike drove Ravok further back. Each feint forced the warlord to pivot on his weakening leg. The massive Iron Maw champion was still dangerous, still capable of ending the fight with a single well-placed blow. But the tide had turned irrevocably in Kael's favor. The crowd sensed it. The murmurs had grown into a sustained roar, thousands of voices calling out encouragement to their king. Even the lords who had thrown their lot in with Malachar were beginning to shift uncomfortably in their seats, calculating the cost of backing the wrong side. Alara watched from where she stood under guard, her heart pounding in time with the clash of steel. She had never seen combat like this, the brutality of it, the terrible beauty. Two men locked in a dance where one wrong step meant death. Ravok swung his war axe in a desperate arc, putting all his remaining strength behind the blow. Kael ducked beneath it and came up inside the warlord's guard, his sword flashing toward Ravok's throat. And then he stopped. The blade hovered a hair's breadth from the Iron Maw champion's neck, close enough to draw a thin line of blood where steel kissed skin. Ravok froze, his chest heaving, his one good eye fixed on the man who held his life in his hands. "Yield," Kael said. His voice carried across the silent arena, calm and commanding. "Yield, and this ends." For a long moment, Ravok did not move. His massive frame trembled with exhaustion, and something that might have been rage. To yield was to admit defeat. For a warlord of the Iron Maw, defeat was worse than death. But Ravok was not merely a warrior. He was a leader, a man responsible for the survival of his people. And as he looked into the amber eyes of the Lycan King, he saw something unexpected. He saw a man who did not want to kill him. "Why?" Ravok's voice was a graveled rasp. "You have won. Take my head. End this." "Your head will not feed your people." Kael did not lower his sword, but his voice lost some of its edge. "Your head will not plow fields or build homes or raise children. I have fought your warriors for many years. I know their courage, their strength, their loyalty to their families. I do not wish to destroy them. I wish to find another way." "There is no other way. Your uncle promised us the southern plains. Without that land, my people starve." "My uncle promised you land that was never his to give. He used you, Ravok. He used your desperation, your need, to further his own ambitions. When I am king in truth, I will honor no bargain made by a traitor." Ravok's eye narrowed. "Then we are enemies still." "We do not have to be." Kael took a breath, and when he spoke again, his voice was loud enough for the entire arena to hear. "I offer you a choice, warlord, not the choice between victory and defeat. That choice has already been made. I offer you the choice between continued war and lasting peace." The arena had gone deathly quiet. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "The southern plains are the breadbasket of my kingdom. I cannot give them to a foreign power. But the eastern highlands, the territory we have fought over for so long, that land can be shared. Grazing rights, hunting grounds, a border that both our peoples can cross in peace, trade instead of raids, cooperation instead of conflict." "You would give us what we have been fighting to take?" "I would give you a reason to stop fighting. Your people are warriors, but they are also fathers and mothers, sons and daughters. How many of them have died in this endless war? How many more will die if it continues? I am tired of sending young men to their graves. I suspect you are too." Ravok stared at him for a long, searching moment. Then slowly he lowered his war axe and let it fall to the sand. "I yield." The words echoed through the arena like a thunderclap. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the crowd erupted into chaos. Cheers and shouts and the stamping of feet shook the very stones of the citadel. The king had won. The impossible had happened. Kael lowered his sword and extended his hand to the fallen warlord. Ravok looked at it, then at the king's face, and something shifted in his expression. Respect, perhaps, or recognition. One warrior acknowledging another. He clasped Kael's forearm in the traditional grip of equals. "You are not what I expected, Lycan King. Nor are you, warlord. Perhaps that is why peace might actually be possible." In the regent's box, Malachar had gone the color of curdled milk. His careful plans, his years of scheming, had collapsed in the space of a single morning. The champion he had counted on lay defeated. The alliance he had forged was unraveling before his eyes, and his nephew, the young warrior he had dismissed as a threat, stood triumphant in the center of the arena. He rose from his seat, his movements stiff and mechanical. Vealoria reached for his arm, but he shook her off with a snarl. He was not finished yet. He still had cards to play. "Guards!" His voice cracked across the arena. "Seize the warlord! He is an enemy of the realm! His presence here is an act of war!" The guards hesitated, looking from the regent to the king and back again. Their loyalties were divided, their certainties shattered. Kael turned to face his uncle, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 1,000 years of royal authority. "Lord Malachar, you stand accused of treason against the crown, of the murder of King Darius, my father and your brother, of conspiring with foreign enemies to overthrow the rightful government of this realm. How do you plead?" "I plead that you have lost your mind." Malachar's composure was cracking, desperation bleeding through the cracks. "These are lies, fabrications invented by that witch you have taken to your bed. I have served this kingdom faithfully since your father's death." "You have served yourself. You have bled this kingdom dry while I fought and died on the borders you deliberately weakened. You murdered my father and blamed his death on a failed ritual. And you conspired with Ravok to sell our people into foreign subjugation." "Prove it!" Malachar screamed. "Where is your evidence? Where are your witnesses?" "Here." The voice came from the edge of the arena, where a young man with copper hair and pale blue eyes was pushing through the crowd. Cassian, Malachar's own son. "I will testify," Cassian said, his voice steady despite the terror that flickered in his eyes. "I will tell the lords everything I know. The secret meetings, the letters to Ravok, the poison that killed King Darius, all of it." Malachar stared at his son as if seeing a ghost. "You would betray your own father? You betrayed everything our family was supposed to stand for. You murdered a good king. You sold our people to their enemies. You used my sister as a pawn in your schemes. I will not carry your sins any longer. And there is more." This time it was Vealoria who spoke, stepping forward from the regent's box, her face pale but determined. "In the eastern tower, 3rd floor, behind the tapestry of the moon goddess, that is where my father keeps his most secret documents, the proof of everything. Search it, and you will find the truth." Malachar lunged toward his daughter, his face contorted with rage. "Treacherous whore! After everything I did for you!" Guards moved to intercept him, but it was General Torvik who reached him first. The old warrior's fist connected with Malachar's jaw with a crack that echoed through the arena. The regent crumpled to the ground, unconscious before he hit the stone. Torvik stood over him, his chest heaving, his eyes bright with the satisfaction of a debt finally paid. "That was for Darius," he said. "That was for all the years of lies." The search of the eastern tower took less than an hour. Kael led the party himself, accompanied by Torvik, a squad of trusted guards, and Alara, who had been released from custody the moment the trial ended. They found the hidden chamber exactly where Vealoria had described, concealed behind a tapestry that depicted the moon goddess in all her silver glory. The room beyond was small but meticulously organized. Shelves lined the walls, filled with ledgers and scrolls and bundles of correspondence. A lifetime of secrets, carefully preserved for reasons only Malachar could explain. Alara moved through the room, her oracle senses tingling. She could feel the weight of deception pressing in from every direction, years of lies and manipulation saturating the very air. She reached out and touched one of the ledgers, and the visions came. She saw Malachar writing in this very book, recording payments to assassins and spies. She saw him composing letters to Ravok, promising land and power in exchange for military support. She saw him standing over the body of King Darius, watching with cold satisfaction as the poison did its work. "It is all here," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Everything, the proof you need." Kael took the ledger from her hands, his expression unreadable as he leafed through its pages. When he finally looked up, his amber eyes were bright with unshed tears. "All this time," he whispered. "All this time, and I never knew. I blamed myself. I blamed my father. I never once suspected the truth." "How could you have known?" Torvik placed a heavy hand on his king's shoulder. "Malachar was clever. He covered his tracks well. If not for Alara, we might never have learned the truth." "If not for Alara?" Kael turned to look at her, and something in his expression made her heart skip. "If not for a village healer who had the courage to speak when silence would have been safer. This kingdom owes you a debt it can never repay." "I want no debt," Alara said. "I want only justice. For your father, for all the people who suffered while Malachar played his games." Justice you shall have." The trial of Lord Malachar was held 3 days later in the Great Hall of Silvercrest. The evidence was overwhelming, the ledgers documenting payments to assassins, the letters exchanged with Ravak outlining the terms of their alliance. The testimony of Cassian, who recounted years of overheard conversations and observed conspiracies. Even Ravak himself took the stand, confirming that Malachar had approached him with offers of territory in exchange for support against the rightful king. Malachar offered no defense. He sat in the prisoner's dock, his fine robes replaced by the rough garments of a condemned man, his face a mask of bitter defeat. When given the opportunity to speak, he simply laughed. "You think you have won," he said, his voice carrying through the silent hall. "You think destroying me will fix everything that is broken in this kingdom. But the rot goes deeper than one man. The lords who supported me, the officials who took my bribes, the soldiers who followed my orders, they are still here. They will smile and bow and swear loyalty to their new king, but in their hearts they will always be looking for the next Malachar, the next man who promises them power and wealth in exchange for betrayal." "Perhaps," Kale replied from the throne, "but they will also remember what happened to you. They will remember that treachery has a price, and perhaps that memory will make them think twice before they follow the next Malachar down the path of destruction." Pretty words. We shall see how long they last. The sentence was death. There could be no other verdict for regicide and high treason. Malachar accepted it with the cold dignity of a man who had long since made peace with his own mortality. He asked only one favor, that his children be spared, that they not be punished for the sins of their father. It was Alara who spoke for them. She stood before the assembled lords, the village healer who had somehow found herself at the center of history, and she told them what she had seen in Cassian and Valoria. Their revulsion at their father's crimes, their courage in coming forward when silence would have been so much easier, their desperate hope for redemption. "They are not their father," she concluded. "They made a choice to stand against him when that choice could have cost them everything. That choice deserves to be honored." Kael listened, then rendered his verdict. Cassian and Valoria were stripped of their titles and lands, but their lives were spared. More than that, they were given a chance to earn back their honor. Cassian was assigned to the border garrisons, where he would serve as a common soldier until he proved his worth. Valoria was tasked with overseeing the reconstruction of the war-torn Eastern territories, using her education and administrative skills to rebuild what her father's ambitions had destroyed. It was mercy tempered with justice. And as Alara watched the siblings bow their heads in grateful acceptance, she felt something loosen in her chest. This was what she had hoped for, not vengeance, but healing. Not destruction, but the possibility of new beginnings. Malachar was executed at dawn the following morning. Kael did not attend. He had no desire to watch his uncle die, no matter what crimes the man had committed. Instead, he spent the hours before sunrise in the royal crypts, standing before his father's tomb, speaking words that only the dead could hear. Alara found him there as the first light of day began to filter through the narrow windows. "It is done," she said softly. "He is gone." Kael did not turn. "I thought I would feel something, satisfaction, closure, something, but I just feel empty. Revenge rarely fills the voids we hope it will." "Is that what this was? Revenge?" "Justice, I think. There is a difference, even if the outcome looks the same." He finally turned to face her, and she saw the exhaustion etched into every line of his face. He had not slept in days, had borne the weight of revelation and trial and judgment on shoulders already burdened by years of war. He looked like a man who had been pushed beyond the limits of endurance and was still somehow standing. "The moon's covenant," he said. "It must still be performed. The full moon rises tonight. Are you ready?" "I do not know if anyone is ever ready for something like this, but I have no choice. The kingdom needs stability. The lords need to see their king complete the ritual that binds him to the throne. If I fail, if I follow my father into whatever darkness took him, then everything we have fought for will be for nothing." Alara reached out and took his hand. The visions came, as they always did, but she had learned to filter them now, to focus on what she needed to see. She looked into his heart and saw the fear that he would not admit to anyone else, the terror of repeating his father's fate, the desperate hope that he would prove worthy of the crown he had fought so hard to claim. "You will not fail," she said. "Your father did not fail either. He was murdered by a man he trusted. The ritual did not destroy him. Treachery did, and that treachery has been exposed and punished. You face the covenant with clean hands and a clear conscience. That is more than most kings can claim. Will you be there? Tonight, in the ritual circle. Will you stand with me? If you want me there, I will be there. I want more than that. His hand tightened around hers. The covenant requires a witness. Someone to anchor the king to the mortal world while he communes with the power of the moon. Traditionally, it is the queen who serves this role. I have no queen, but I have you. Alara's breath caught. You are asking me to participate in the ritual? I am asking you to stand beside me, to be my anchor as I will be yours. Not because tradition demands it, but because I cannot imagine facing this moment with anyone else. She should have refused. She was a village healer, an oracle with a gift she had spent her whole life hiding. She had no training in the mystical arts, no understanding of the cosmic forces that the covenant was meant to channel. She was utterly unqualified for what he was asking. But when she looked into his amber eyes, she saw something that made all her objections fade to insignificance. She saw trust. Complete, unconditional trust in a man who had spent years learning that trust was a weakness to be exploited. Yes, she said, I will stand with you. The ritual circle was located at the highest point of Silvercrest, a platform of ancient stone open to the sky and surrounded by 13 pillars carved with runes that predated the citadel itself. By the time the full moon rose, a crowd had gathered on the terraces below. Thousands of people come to witness their king's ascension. Kale stood at the center of the circle, stripped to the waist, his body painted with symbols of power and protection in silver ink that gleamed in the moonlight. Alara stood across from him, wearing a simple white robe that the priestesses had provided, her hair unbound and flowing over her shoulders. Between them, on a pedestal of black stone, rested the moon's crown. It was an ancient thing, forged in an age when the world was young, a circlet of silver and moonstone that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. No Lycan king could claim the throne without it. No Lycan king could wear it without completing the covenant. The high priestess, a woman so old she seemed to have been carved from the mountain itself, raised her arms to the sky. We gather beneath the eye of the goddess, she intoned, her voice carrying across the silent circle. We gather to witness the binding of king to kingdom, of mortal to moon, of flesh to power. Let the covenant be spoken. Let the bond be forged. Kale stepped forward and placed his hands on the crown. The moment he touched it, the runes on the pillars blazed to life, filling the circle with silver fire. The power was immense, overwhelming, a force that threatened to sweep him away like a leaf in a hurricane. But he was not alone. Alara reached out through their joined hands, through the connection they had forged over weeks of shared danger and growing trust. She could feel his struggle, feel the power trying to consume him as it had consumed so many before. She reached deeper, past the barriers of flesh and thought, until she touched the core of who he was, and she held on. The visions came, not just from him, but from everywhere. She saw the history of the Lycan people unfolding before her like a tapestry. She saw kings and queens, warriors and scholars, saints and sinners. She saw the moon's covenant performed 100 times, 1,000 times, each ritual adding another thread to the web of power that protected the realm. She saw the night Darius died, not through the fragmentary memories of witnesses, but through the eyes of the moon itself. She saw the poison slip into his wine, saw him fight against its effects, saw him reach for the crown even as death claimed him. And she saw something else, something that made her heart stop. She saw the future, not a fixed destiny, but a possibility, a vision of what could be if the choices were right, if the courage held, if love proved stronger than fear. She saw Kale on the throne, older now, his hair fully silver, his face lined with the cares of rule. But his eyes were warm, filled with a peace that the younger Kyle had never known. She saw herself beside him, her autumn hair streaked with gray, her oracle's sight dimmed by age, but never extinguished. She saw children, grandchildren, a dynasty built not on blood and treachery, but on justice and hope. She saw Ravok, old and gray, sitting across a negotiating table from Lycan lords, hammering out the details of a trade agreement that would benefit both peoples. She saw Vealoria, her ice-blue eyes softened by years of service, receiving the thanks of villagers whose homes she had helped rebuild. She saw Cassian, scarred by battle but unbroken in spirit, teaching young soldiers that honor was more important than victory. She saw a kingdom at peace, a future worth fighting for. And then the vision faded, and she was back in the ritual circle, her hands clasped in Kael's, the moon's crown blazing with silver fire between them. The high priestess spoke the final words of the covenant, words in a language older than memory. The runes on the pillars flared one last time, then went dark. The crown rose from its pedestal, lifted by unseen hands, and settled onto Kael's brow. It fit as if it had been made for him. Perhaps it had. The crowd below erupted into cheers, their voices rising to the stars. The moon's covenant was complete. Kael Draconis was king in truth as well as name, but he did not acknowledge the adulation. His eyes were fixed on Alara, and in them she saw something that made all the fear and uncertainty of the past weeks fade into insignificance. She saw love. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. There were treaties to negotiate, alliances to formalize, a kingdom to rebuild after years of corruption and neglect. Kael threw himself into the work with the same tireless energy he had brought to the battlefield, and Alara found herself drawn into the maelstrom alongside him. Her oracle's gift proved invaluable in the delicate art of diplomacy. She could sense when ambassadors were lying, when merchants were cheating, when allies were having second thoughts. She became Kael's most trusted advisor, the one he turned to when the weight of the crown grew too heavy to bear alone. But it was not just politics that bound them together. In the quiet hours of the night, when the citadel slept and the moon hung silver in the sky, they found moments of peace, long conversations by firelight, sharing memories and dreams and fears, walks on the battlements, watching the stars wheel overhead, simple dinners in his private chambers, away from the formality of the court. They did not rush. There was no need. They had faced death together, had shared visions of each other's deepest selves. The physical intimacy would come in its own time. What they built now was stronger than passion. It was partnership. It was trust. It was the foundation upon which everything else would rest. A month after the covenant, Kael asked her to walk with him to the royal crypts. She had been there only once before, on the morning of Malakar's execution. It was a somber place, filled with the tombs of kings and queens stretching back to the founding of the realm. The air was cold and still, thick with the weight of centuries. Kael led her to his father's tomb, a massive sarcophagus carved from a single block of white marble. The effigy on its lid depicted Darius as he had been in life, strong, wise, every inch a king. "I come here sometimes," Kael said quietly, "to talk to him, to tell him what is happening in the kingdom he loved. I do not know if he can hear me, but it helps." "What have you told him?" "Many things. The treaty with Ravik, the rebuilding of the eastern territories, the trials of the lords who conspired with Malakar." He paused, his eyes still fixed on his father's stone face. "And I have told him about you." "What have you told him about me?" Kael turned to face her, and his expression was more vulnerable than she had ever seen it. "I have told him that I found someone brave and wise and honest, someone who saw the truth when everyone else was content to believe lies, someone who makes me want to be a better king, a better man." He took a breath. "I have told him that I love you." Alara's heart stuttered. They had danced around the word for weeks, neither willing to be the first to speak it aloud. But here, in the presence of his father's spirit, Kael had finally found the courage. "I love you too," she said. "I think I have loved you since the night in the tent, when you let me see your pain and did not turn away from mine." "Then let me ask you something. Not as a king to a subject, but as a man to a woman." He took her hands in his, and she felt the slight tremor in his fingers. "I have been alone for so long. I had convinced myself that I did not need anyone, that the crown was enough. But it is not. The crown is cold and heavy, and it cares nothing for the man who wears it. I need something more. I need someone who will stand beside me, not because duty demands it, but because love compels it." "What are you asking?" "I am asking you to be my wife, my partner, my queen, not because the kingdom needs a queen, though it does, not because tradition demands it, though it does, but because I cannot imagine facing the rest of my life without you, because every morning I want to wake to your face, and every night I want to fall asleep in your arms, because you are the other half of my soul and I am tired of being incomplete." Tears were streaming down Alara's face, but she was smiling. "You are very eloquent for a soldier. I have been practicing that speech for a week. It was a good speech. Does that mean yes?" She answered by rising on her toes and pressing her lips to his. The kiss was soft at first, gentle, then deepening into something that spoke of passion too long denied. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "Yes," she whispered against his lips, 1,000 times yes. The wedding was held on the first day of spring. The entire kingdom seemed to have gathered in Silvercrest for the occasion, lords and ladies in their finest regalia, common folk who had traveled for days to catch a glimpse of their new queen, delegations from neighboring realms come to pay their respects and gauge the strength of the new king. Even Ravok was there, his massive frame draped in ceremonial furs, his one good eye watching the proceedings with something that might have been approval. The treaty negotiations had been completed the week before. For the first time in living memory, the Ironmaw clan and the Lycan kingdom were at peace. Alara walked down the aisle of the great hall on General Torvik's arm. The old warrior had been honored to be asked, and he performed his duty with the same quiet dignity he brought to everything. When he placed her hand in Kael's, his eyes were suspiciously bright. "Take care of her," he murmured, too low for anyone else to hear. "She is the best thing that ever happened to you." "I know," Kael replied, "I know." The ceremony was ancient and beautiful, words spoken in the old tongue, vows exchanged beneath the silver banners of House Draconis. When the high priestess pronounced them husband and wife, king and queen, the hall erupted into cheers that shook the very foundations of the citadel. But Alara barely heard them. Her entire world had narrowed to the man standing before her, his amber eyes shining with a joy she had never thought to see in such a careworn face. "Hello, wife," he said. "Hello, husband. Are you ready for this? The crown, the court, the endless parade of problems and petitions?" "I am ready for anything, as long as you are beside me." He smiled, and it transformed his face, erasing years of hardship and grief. "Then let us begin." The seasons turned, and with them the kingdom began to heal. The first year of Kael's reign was marked by changes that would have seemed impossible just months before. The treaty with the Ironmaw clan held firm, and the eastern highlands that had been soaked in blood for so long began to know the unfamiliar blessing of peace. Merchants traveled roads that had been too dangerous to walk. Farmers planted crops in fields that had been abandoned to war. Cassian proved himself in the border garrisons, earning promotion after promotion through skill and dedication rather than birth. Valoria threw herself into the reconstruction of the eastern settlements with a fervor that surprised even those who had believed in her redemption. The children of the traitor were becoming pillars of the realm they had nearly helped destroy. And through it all, Alara stood beside her king. Her oracle's gift made her invaluable in ways she had never anticipated. She could sense the truth behind diplomatic smiles, the fear beneath brave words, the hope hiding in hearts that had learned not to hope. She became known throughout the realm as the Queen Who Sees, and petitioners traveled from distant provinces just to have her touch their hands and speak what she found there. But it was not her gift that made her a great queen. It was her compassion, her wisdom, her unwavering belief that people could change, that redemption was possible, that the future did not have to be defined by the sins of the past. On the anniversary of their wedding, Kael and Alara stood together on the battlements of Silvercrest, watching a delegation from the Ironmaw clan wind its way up the mountain road. Ravok himself led the party, his white hair gleaming in the afternoon sun. He had aged well, the peace seeming to agree with him. Word was that he had taken a wife, a widow from one of the border villages, and that she was expecting their first child. "Do you remember the first time you saw him?" Kael asked, his arm around her waist. "In the arena, when he looked like death itself come to claim me?" "I remember being terrified," Alara admitted. "I remember thinking that if you fell, everything we had fought for would be lost. And now look at him, coming to negotiate trade agreements instead of planning invasions. Who would have thought it possible? You did. You saw the man beneath the warrior. You offered him peace when anyone else would have taken his head. I offered him a chance. He is the one who chose to take it. They watched in comfortable silence as the delegation reached the gates and the trumpet sounded to announce their arrival. Below, the courtyard filled with servants and officials preparing for the formal welcome. Soon there would be ceremonies and banquets and all the elaborate rituals of diplomacy. But for this moment, there was only the two of them. "I received word from Cassian this morning," Kael said. "He has been promoted to captain. His commanding officer says he is one of the finest young officers he has ever served with." "That does not surprise me. He always had the potential. He just needed someone to believe in him." "And Valoria has completed the reconstruction of the eastern settlements. The refugees are returning to their homes. The harvests are expected to be the best in a generation. She found her purpose. Sometimes that is all any of us need." Kael turned to face her, his amber eyes soft with emotion. "You gave them that chance. You spoke for them when anyone else would have demanded their heads. I spoke for mercy. That is not the same thing as giving them their chance. They earned that themselves through their own choices and their own hard work." "You always do that," he said, shaking his head slowly. "Give credit to others for the things you have accomplished. Accept blame for things that were never your fault. One of these days, I am going to convince you to see yourself the way the rest of us see you." "And how is that?" "As someone extraordinary. Someone who changed the fate of a kingdom with nothing but her courage and her conscience. Someone who turned a bitter, battle-scarred soldier into a man who actually believes the future might be worth living for." His words wrapped around her like a warm blanket, easing tensions she had not even realized she was carrying. She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart beneath her cheek. "We should go down," she murmured. "Ravak will be waiting." "Let him wait. I have spent all day being a king. For a few more minutes, I would like to simply be a husband." They stood together as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. The sounds of the arriving delegation drifted up to them on the evening breeze, a reminder of the duties that awaited. But those duties could wait a little longer. "I saw this, you know," Alara said quietly, "during the Covenant. I saw Ravok coming here in peace. I saw the kingdom healing. I saw us standing here together, watching a future we had helped to build. And is that future still unfolding as you saw it? Futures are not fixed. They are built, choice by choice, day by day. But yes, I believe we are on the right path. The path that leads to peace, to prosperity, to everything your father dreamed of before Malachar stole it away." Kael was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. When he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. "I wish he could have seen this. I wish he could have known that his death was not the end of everything he built. He knows." Alara placed her hand over his heart. "I truly believe that. Wherever he is, whatever lies beyond this life, he knows. And he is proud of you, Kael. Proud of the king you have become. Proud of the peace you have forged. Proud of the man you are." He pulled her close, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. And to him, she was. "Thank you," he whispered into her hair. "For everything. For the truth. For the courage. For standing beside me when anyone else would have run. For loving me when I had forgotten how to love myself. You never have to thank me for that. Loving you is the easiest thing I have ever done." The moon rose over the mountains, silver and serene, blessing them with its ancient light. Below, the delegation had reached the great hall, and soon the ceremonies would begin. There would be speeches and toasts and the careful dance of diplomacy that was the lifeblood of any lasting peace. But all of that could wait. For now, there was only this: a king and his queen, a warrior and his oracle. Two souls who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from the ashes of betrayal and loss. The moon's covenant had bound Kael to his throne. But it was love that had bound him to Alara, and that bond, forged in fire and moonlight, would endure long after the ceremonies were forgotten and the treaties were dust. The story of the king who learned to hope again, and the healer who taught him how, would be told for generations. It would become legend, then myth, a tale whispered to children on cold winter nights when the moon hung full and bright in the sky. But for Kael and Alara, standing together on the battlements of Silvercrest as the stars began to emerge, it was not a story. It was simply their life, and it was only just beginning.